African Americans have left their mark on American history, from their toils in slavery to their courage in fighting in wars. To overcome the brutality of whites, blacks needed hope from one another. They found this hope in music. Music made their days on the field easier. Music made them stronger. It was a way to convey their messages and tell their stories. The unique rhythms came to be enjoyed by all Americans as blacks made their way onto the popular music scene. They brought originality and passion to their music. They broke down barriers and raised awareness. Focused on genres ranging from spirituals to jazz, African Americans made their mark on American music from the beginning of slavery in the 1600s to the mid-1900s.
During the time of the Atlantic slave trade, captured Africans tried to preserve as much of their culture as possible, and most of that was expressed through music. Music during the time of slavery was expressed in many ways, varying from instruments such as the drums, the voice, and the banjo. During the workdays, slave field haulers would sing work songs to help get through the day, to provide a little bit of entertainment. One of the types of songs these field haulers would sing is the call and response. This consists of two distinct different phrases called out by two different groups, one after the other, in a pattern of sort. The banjo itself originated from African Americans during the early years of slavery, and is derived from various African instruments such as the kora and the kontin. These two African instruments share similar traits such as the strings plus the gourd body shape, as well as the sound. However, it was the banjo which became the most popular instrument among the African American community during the slave era. It even became a mainstream instrument used by many in the States, of all color and all walks of life. The banjo and instruments like it were made of animal skin and later on made of plastic. The impact that African Americans made on society during the early years of the United States through music was huge. For instance, to help slaves get through the misery and pains of slavery, they sang work songs which also express these feelings through the music and come together as a community as a whole. This is much like the other African American established genres such as blues and jazz, because the music brought the community together as well as express feelings of all sorts in their life.
From the beginning of slavery, African American spirituals have been a popular genre, becoming world-known in the 1870s. However, as spirituals progress, it is unclear where spirituals end and the blues begin. What makes spirituals stand out is everyone plays a part in the song, and it is therefore considered communal music. Because of the multiple participants, spirituals allow for the varied harmonies not found in other music styles. Most spirituals are sung in a call and response style, where the lead singer would sing out the main chorus, and the rest of the participants would reply either repeating the leader or calling out a separate phrase. It is highly abstract, and the lyrics deal with nature or philosophical concerns, and are highly religious rather than secular. Spiritual music stems from slave life and reflects the struggles the African Americans encountered. Spirituals often reshape old hymns, folk songs, popular songs, or minstrel songs into a new song altogether. Arnold Shaw most easily categorized spirituals into three systems. The first are sorrow songs, noted by the slow tempo and the melancholy tales that speak of the troubles and restrictions of slavery. A popular example of the sorrow song is Nobody Knows the Troubles I See. Jubilees are the second system and are recognized by their happy and joyful melody that usually sings praise to God and other heroes. These fast songs include Go Tell It on the Mountain. Shaw's final category is the cult songs that are said to have originated during secret slave meetings that convey messages to other slaves. Hush, Somebody's Calling My Name, and North to Freedom are common cult songs. Spirituals became popular in America when George L. White from Fisk University in 1871 grouped together students who sang the genre. He helped them practice, and after 2 years sent them on a tour across the nation to raise money for the university. The group was given the name the Jubilee Singers and sang in a style that soon became Jubilee songs. The Jubilee Singers inspired people from all over the country with their spiritual songs and enhanced the love for music. Blacks were able to relate to the messages the songs carried, and the upbeat melody brought harmony to many. The songs brought happiness and hope to the slaves on plantations and told the stories of the struggles and oppressions African slaves faced. Despite these sometimes painful messages, all people could unite in their love of the music. Classical music has always been for the virtuous individuals. That statement did not discriminate. and therefore many distinguishable individuals became well known throughout the country when African Americans hit the scene during the 1800s. One individual was Louis Gottschalk, born in New Orleans, Louisiana, 1829, who did appear white but had black blood. His Haitian mother and English father sent him to France for schooling, where he fostered his musical talents. His skillful piano playing and own compositions led to praise from many European artists, and he was claimed to have written some of the best exotic products of his time. He is also one of the earliest American composers to embed Black and Creole influences in his music, as we can hear in his pianistic pieces such as La Bannière or La Savane. White composers also invoked African imagery, such as the scenery of the landscape as noted in L'Africaine by Giacomo Meyerbeer. By the 1900s, many blacks chose to pursue classical musical careers in New Orleans. Margaret Bonds was one of these, who was a pianistic composer who became a prominent figure of her time. For being a woman, she gained recognition and uncommon praise for her talents. The wealthier individuals were able to travel abroad to receive in-depth training, and then chose to become educators or composers. African American composers had a rich playlist to bring forth, as they chose to incorporate the styles of their heritage in the melodies. African American classical music was also used as influence for later genres, such as blues and jazz. Classical music allowed for blacks to pursue equal passions with their white counterparts, and they proved to be just as popular. The composers stayed true to their heritage and embraced the African styles and tones. While African Americans did not personally create the minstrelsy genre, they were the subject matter of the songs. Minstrelsy grew in popularity from 1840 to 1870, where white performers would darken their faces with burnt coal and portray slave life. Zip Coon and Jim Crow were two caricatures used to describe black life to the audience. Zip Coon was an idiotic plantation slave, and Jim Crow was a reckless urban slave. By the end of the 19th century, minstrels had developed three distinct parts. The first was a comic banter between the characters, followed by sentimental songs. The second part was called olio, that consisted of song and dance, and verse speaking. The third was the finale with the entire cast. Occasionally, black performers would find their way onto the minstrel stage, but it wasn't until the 1860s that African American presence was common. However, there was one performer, William Lane, who was heralded as one of the best dancers the world has seen and was a prized actor. Having African Americans in the cast brought originality and enhanced the performance. The white performance was pathetic, tragic, and exaggerated, and they belittled the slaves and were entirely stereotypical. While minstrelsy raised awareness of the African conditions, both living and working, the shows represented the dominant white beliefs about blacks rather than the oppressed black truth. However well black performers were, they were unable to sway the popular belief about African Americans that whites had already formed during the years of the shows. But blacks made some headway in minstrelsy. By being performers in the shows, they were able to break down those barriers and brought a more humanistic approach to the shows in their reality. Musical theater for blacks was built on minstrelsy, primarily because the actors were former performers of minstrelsy, but also for the works of African American Ernest Hogan and his coon songs. His first was All Coons Look Alike to Me, which gave subject matter for the genre. Musical theater also paved the way for ragtime with the light rhythms. Black musical theater became a Broadway spectacle with Sam T. Jack's The Creole Show in 1890. Eventually, black musicals faded out of Broadway and bounded into the Harlem area, where they presented their shows to a real Negro theater, named so because the audiences were entirely black. Writers and performers felt more freedom in Harlem, which allowed for creativity to flourish and more diverse topics to be covered. Romance between blacks on stage was finally accepted, and themes ranging from burlesque to dramas were major hits. Finally, in 1921, in what scholars say was the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, black musicals returned to Broadway with Shuffle Along. The Harlem Renaissance welcomed creativity and imagination, and blacks could finally perform all they had dreamed. Musicals were enriched by the African folk traditions and its use of mythology, storytelling, music, and dance. While segregation was still prominent, African American musical theater was enjoyed by all, and many white writers still chose blacks to play their lead roles. Segregation still existed, but in theater, an actor was an actor, no matter their color.
Blues developed in the mid-1800s, partly influenced by slavery. Slaves would sing songs that W.E.B. Du Bois, a civil rights activist, called sorrow songs. This form of music is not just music, but is a way that African Americans could express themselves. Blues music started in the Deep South in rural areas, in small towns and cities such as New Orleans and Memphis. Certainly the masses migrating to the north carried with them the burdens of a painful past, a collective history of slavery in addition to more immediate abusers under Jim Crow. While the North beckoned with opportunity, many African Americans left the only homes they had known. The blues, with echoing train whistles, sudden flights from danger, and mournful cries associated with deep sorrow, emerged as a natural mode for capturing and expressing these moments of transition. Blues is developed with African elements in the music's tonal and timbral flexibility. Important to the blues is the blue note, a flattened or altered note often at the 3rd, 5th, or 7th degree of scale. The first blues artist, W.C. Handy, the father of blues, recorded over 150 compositions, 60 of them being blues songs, even after going blind in 1943. Handy's contributions in shaping what would be called the blues were influenced by the African American music folk traditions that he experienced during his travels and performances. Handy popularized a new style of music which incorporated the now traditional 12-bar form recognized as the blues. Most of Handy's songs were written about the hardships that he had gone through, such as hunger, poverty, and homelessness. Two of his most famous songs are Memphis Blues, which was the first blues songs to ever be published, and St. Louis Blues. Numerous bands and performers have recorded W.C. Handy's work still to this day, and have inspired many other blues musicians through the era of blues. Men weren't the only ones to have a big impact on blues. Ma Rainey was one of the first blues musicians of her time. She was a pioneer for all of the other women who sang in the blues era. Rainey fostered the blues idiom and did so by linking earthy spirit of country blues with a classic style. She was also the first woman to incorporate blues into vaudeville, minstrel, and tent shows. Some of her most famous hits are Countin' Blues and C.C. Rider. C.C. Rider was one of the most famous and recorded of all blues songs. Rainey also sang about the hardships of African Americans faced in the early 1900s. Rainey was inducted into the Blues Foundation Hall of Fame in 1990. In 2004, C.C. Rider was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame.
Jazz is a marvel of paradox. Too fundamentally human, at least as modern humanity goes, to be typically racial. Too international to be characteristically national. Too much abroad in the world to have a special home. And yet jazz, in spite of it all, is 1 part American and 3 parts American Negro, and was originally the nobody's child of the levee and the city slum. Jazz is a synthesis of African and European musical influences, which weave rhythm, harmony, and melody together through improvisation. Jazz began in the early 20th century as African Americans migrated from rural areas in the South to cities in the North. By the 1910s, observers saw jazz as a distinct style of music, of syncopated instrumental dance music, which was performed by barroom piano players, small combos in nightclubs, and later, larger syncopated orchestras, in dance halls, theaters, and occasionally the concert hall. Initially, jazz was unpopular with white Americans because they feared its black cultural roots, its potential to create interracial contact, and its seemingly acceleration of modern life. Thus, black jazz musicians were often incredibly poor as they struggled to pay their monthly bills. They played on the shout circuit, or parties held at private black residences, where people could dance, sing, and eat. Attendees were expected to donate to the musicians to pay the rent. Fats Waller, for example, became one of the first pioneers of the shout circuit, though his music became popular in some shady circles. In 1926, he was abducted by gangsters to play at a private recital for Al Capone, which lasted 3 days and included a lot of champagne. Eventually, younger white American generations, discontent with Victorian conceptions of music, embraced jazz. Thus, while jazz was a unique product of African American culture, it became co-opted by white Americans. Paul Whiteman, the self-proclaimed king of jazz, attempted to make jazz more respectable by toning down its rhythms and fusing it with popular songs and classical themes. When asked where jazz came from, he said it sprang into existence about 10 years ago from nowhere in particular, thus failing to acknowledge the African American role in the creation of jazz. Yet African American jazz musicians like Duke Ellington bridged the racial gulf because of the popularity of their music. Duke Ellington was a founder of swing, a jazz genre characterized by big bands playing in ballrooms for large audiences. During the 1930s, it was at its height of popularity. It provided an escape from the pressures of the world, the Depression and the coming of World War II, a reality which affected people regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic class. Ellington, like other African American musicians, became advocates for the civil rights movement, holding benefit concerts for the NAACP, for example.
Much is to be said about the work of African Americans in society. They helped build a nation with their blood, sweat, and tears. They brought new culture and new experiences. They helped fight for American freedom, and they forced whites to open their eyes to acceptance. Their music gave hope, peace, and joy. They broke down barriers and broke through the walls of discrimination. Music helped African Americans obtain their dream of a world of equality, as they proved their worth with their talents and bravery. Through the music they created, they united a nation.